this was not some random killing. This was a killing with a very clear purpose, and that it was a killing with some state involvement.
I just promised to Sasha, one day people will know truth about him.
The 1st of November 2006. Alexander Litvinenko caught on CCTV on his way to a meeting with two former Russian spies at the upmarket Millennium Hotel in central London. He thought he was amongst friends. 22 days later, he was dead.
It was perhaps the most audacious murder on British soil ever, a crime that shocked the world. We followed the evidence at the public inquiry into his murder, interviewing all the key witnesses in this extraordinary story and revisiting the key locations.
Alexander Litvinenko was the Russian spy who turned against his old paymasters. A man steeped in the shady, sometimes disreputable world of intelligence. He used to work for the KGB at a high level, but was granted asylum in Britain in 2000.
He was very loyal to this country, and he was very happy to be here.
6 years later, on the 1st of November, just after he became a British citizen, he met two former colleagues from Russia's intelligence world in the Pine Bar at the Millennium Hotel. Here he is leaving the meeting. 2 days later, he was admitted to his local hospital, vomiting and in great pain.
A colleague came into my office and explained that in hospital in North London was a man who was telling a quite extraordinary story. He was saying that he was a former member of the Russian intelligence agency and that he believed he had been poisoned by some of his former colleagues.
The former KGB man was transferred to University College Hospital in central London for intensive care, with a police escort.
And I met Metropolitan Police, and what is very important, Sasha was able to talk, and they started to interview him.
So this was now an investigation into an attempted murder?
Yes.
Alexander Litvinenko's white blood cell count was catastrophically low.
He was brought to us with symptoms and signs of bone marrow failure.
He started to lose his hair, and when I came to see him, it was exactly what you saw in a picture in a newspaper. After that, he never came out from this bed.
Specialist consultants were baffled, but his life was ebbing away.
His vital organs were being destroyed in a sequential pattern. It started with his liver and then was followed very rapidly by his kidneys and then his heart. We could see that we were losing the battle right in front of our eyes.
We're in the unusual position of having what you could describe as a living murder victim telling us about how it was that he came to believe that he was meeting his death.
So there were police by his bedside, but also government scientists from the Ministry of Defence and others in plain clothes.
The police officers were there, but there were some people who probably weren't police officers but were possibly members of the security services. And
Spooks.
And we don't know. Well, yes, possibly.
A couple of days after he was admitted, we had a brainstorming session with various medical colleagues, pharmacists, toxicologists, and colleagues from Public Health England, and we considered all possibilities.
As a last resort, the highly unusual decision was made to send blood and urine samples here to the government's top-secret nuclear research centre at Aldermaston. This is the research site responsible for developing Britain's nuclear bomb.
A confidential source with close knowledge of these events told me a fascinating story. about how the poison was finally discovered. It's never been revealed before. It hinges on expertise and luck.
At Aldermaston, they first used a technique called spectroscopy to analyse the samples. We asked one of Britain's most eminent particle physicists, Professor Ian Shipsey, to explain how it works.
We take the blood and we place it into a vessel. We attach the vessel to a vacuum pump to remove all of the air. In that vessel is also a sensitive camera that can detect radiation if it's present in the blood. We attach the camera to a computer, and the output of the camera produces the trace that you see on the screen. This trace is the background level, and this peak is the signal. The location of the peak identifies the radioactive isotope present.
Aldermaston first looked for gamma radiation and then noticed something very unusual, a small spike in the trace. By chance, the scientist who worked on the nuclear bomb program overheard the scientists discussing the results. He immediately recognized this as the small gamma-ray spike of polonium, which used to be a key component of nuclear weapons.
Polonium is 100% deadly. It destroys cells, the immune system, and leads to organ failure throughout the body.
Does it surprise you that he managed to recognise that gamma spike?
For most people it would be hard to do, but with the right experience, it's like recognising an old friend's face in a crowd.
The realisation that Alexander Litvinenko was poisoned by polonium was described to me as a eureka moment. The implication for public health was severe. Polonium-210 is highly radioactive. I understand that night the government's public health body was warned about a possible radiological contamination incident on the streets of London.
The Health Protection Agency scrambled its emergency team. 20 scientists worked through the night. Such was the risk to public health.
We were finding polonium in aircraft on which people involved in this inquiry had flown, in a football stadium, in restaurants, in hotels, and of course the public were understandably very concerned. Were they at risk?
The following day, Aldermaston confirmed it was poisoning with radioactive polonium-210. Alexander Litvinenko died in hospital the very same day. His hospital room was sealed.
I've been a consultant for over 20 years. I've never seen a case like this, and I hope I never do again.
So it's possible that the true cause of death wouldn't have been found out and it would have been put down to some mystery illness, perhaps?
Yes, absolutely.
If he died a week earlier, it would simply have been recorded as an unexplained death. It was almost a perfect murder. But the polonium was discovered, and Marina Litvinenko was told it wasn't safe to go home.
I received a telephone call from police. They said, Marina, we even don't know how to tell it to you because it's never been in our practice to manage with polonium-210, with a radioactive material, what kill a person. And I said, okay, and what we're going to do? They said, another thing, we just realized it may be not safe place for you to stay in a house. It means in the same time I lost everything.
The government's Civil Contingencies Committee, COBRA, met 4 times in the week after the attack. The Health and Safety Executive was worried about causing alarm by closing contaminated hotels.
My source told me that they even tested the London Underground, stations and trains, and found traces of polonium. This remained secret at the time to avoid public panic.
At the peak of its investigation, the Met had more than 100 detectives on the case.
Gentlemen, can you dress away from the front of the premises, please? You're blocking the pavement.
Radioactive polonium-210 had left a trail, a calling card for murder. On planes, in cars, on china, tables and chairs.
The obvious line of inquiry is you follow the trail, and that's exactly what this investigation was. Trails of polonium across London and beyond, well over 40 sites of radioactive contamination. We were cutting new ground almost at every stage of this inquiry.
The two former Russian spies who met Alexander Litvinenko at the Millennium Hotel before he fell ill were quickly identified as prime suspects. Here, Andrei Lugovoy is caught on the hotel's security camera on his way to the toilets, hand in pocket. Was he hiding the poison? 15 minutes later, Dmitry Kovtun does the same, spending 3 minutes in the toilets. The bathroom sinks, the hand dryer and one toilet door were later found to have some of the heaviest contamination of all. The polonium trail starts on the 16th of October 2006 when Alexander Litvinenko met both prime suspects. This is thought to be the day of a first murder attempt. The sushi bar where they had lunch was contaminated. They spent the night at the Best Western Hotel in Shaftesbury Avenue. Very heavy contamination was found in their rooms. Lugovoy was back in London on the 25th of October. His room at the Sheraton Park Lane was heavily contaminated, as was the laundry. 3 days later, he flew from Moscow to London. Polonium was found on the British Airways flight. And Kovtun flew from Moscow to Hamburg on the 1st of November. Again, polonium was found in the city by German police.
This was the day they met Litvinenko round the corner at the Millennium Hotel in the heart of London's Mayfair. On this day, he received the fatal dose in his tea. An intelligence source told me that when they mapped Lugovoy and Kovtun's movements against the exact places where the contamination was, there was a precise match.
In May 2007, the then Director of Public Prosecutions, Ken MacDonald, recommended prosecution for murder. It was a bold step.
This was not some random killing. This was a killing with a very clear purpose, and that it was a killing with some state involvement.
So was the Russian state involved? The inquiry heard strong scientific evidence that it was. Professor Norman Dombey is a physicist who gave evidence to the inquiry. The secret city of Sarov is the only place where the polonium could have been produced, he says, in a military nuclear reactor.
There's no other reasonable way of making it.
That implies some degree of state control.
Absolutely. Everything about polonium-210 is regulated by the state, its transportation is regulated by the state, and its use is regulated by the state.
But why would Russia want him dead 6 years after he fled to the UK? Well, evidence heard at the public inquiry and conversations with confidential sources make it clear he developed some very powerful enemies.
As far as the Russian state was concerned, Alexander Litvinenko was an agent who'd gone rogue. At this press conference in Moscow, he accused the Russian security forces of corruption and of murdering their opponents. He became an enemy of the state. He spent almost a year in prison, and on his release his friend Yuri Felshtinsky asked a former KGB general if he'd be safe.
He told me that Litvinenko committed treason, and in his organization this treason is punishable by death. And there is no way Litvinenko is going to be pardoned there is no way the crime which Litvinenko committed is going to be forgiven, and that if he would ever see Litvinenko himself personally, if he ever meets him in a dark corner, he will kill him, he would kill him with his own hands.
He fled with his family to the UK and set himself up as a security consultant, operating in the sometimes murky world of Mayfair companies wanting to invest in Russia. The public inquiry heard how he began working for Britain's secret intelligence service. He was paid £2,000 a month and had a handler called Martin, who he used to meet here at Waterstone's bookshop in Piccadilly.
But his work with Western intelligence didn't get him killed. I was told by a source with knowledge of inside thinking here at MI6 that Alexander Litvinenko was murdered on the orders of the Russian state because he crossed two distinct red lines.
The smouldering remains of 64 apartments, torn to shreds by a massive explosion.
This was the first red line, the Moscow apartment bombings in 1999. 300 were killed. Vladimir Putin blamed the Chechens, calling it a terrorist attack. Alexander Litvinenko co-wrote a book called Blowing Up Russia. Sensationally, it accused the Russian Secret Service of bombing Moscow themselves to justify a new war. Russia has always denied this.
Somehow this helped President Putin. No one actually was expected to see it this way, but the reaction of population was that we now have to have a strong leader.
I'm told this article that he wrote in July 2006, just 4 months before he was killed, was the second red line. In it, he made some wild allegations, claiming Putin was a paedophile, largely based, it seems, on this image of the president kissing a boy. The president said there was nothing behind the kiss, but sources say the accusations were dangerous.
Did you ever say to him, be careful?
I couldn't say to him, be quiet. It means to change him. I did accept Sasha like man for what he did with all his personality. And I liked him in this way.
So he wasn't a traitor in your view?
Absolutely.
Officially, Russia continues to deny any involvement in the murder, but some will say actions speak louder than words. Andrei Lugovoy was made a member of Russia's parliament in 2007, giving him immunity from prosecution. And just this year, President Putin awarded him with a medal for services to the motherland.
Mr. Lugovoy is a somewhat feted figure in Russia. He became a member of the Russian parliament. He lives a very public life and he appears to be admired by some elements of the Russian state. I have to say that's not an admiration that we shared.
Впервые в качестве ведущего Андрей Луговой в
Lugovoy now has his own TV show, wait for it, called Traitors.
Только на телеканале «Звезда».
He says he feels hounded, but Marina Litvinenko has no regrets.
You touched me, you touched my family, you killed my husband. You have to be responsible for this.
So what about the other prime suspect, Dmitry Kovtun? Well, he was supposed to give evidence to the inquiry here at the Royal Courts of Justice via video link from Russia, but he pulled out at the last moment.
The inquiry will now hear secret evidence from the intelligence services that can only reinforce the case that this was a state-sponsored plot.
I think it will alter the way that millions and millions of people around the world view Mr. Putin and the Russian regime.
We asked the Kremlin about all this, but received no reply. Given the weight of the open evidence and what we know of the secret assessments being made by MI6, it's hard to see how the inquiry chairman will not implicate the Russian state, and how the murder of Alexander Litvinenko heralded a dangerous new era for relations with the West.